So this quarter, we've been spending some time talking about techniques and tips that you can do in order to increase your score on the SAT or the PSAT tests. Today, we're going to spend some time on the critical reading and one of the more difficult sections of the critical reading, which is the longer paired passages. We're then going to move on to the writing section, and the writing section is memorizing some of the difficult kinds of questions that they ask. But once you have those down, you'll start to see that there's a great deal of repetition in the writing section, and you can use that to your advantage when taking the multiple choice portion. So the critical reading passages can be tricky. The shorter passages are, of course, the easiest ones, and we talked about how it's best not to leave those ones blank if you can avoid it. However, the one that's generally the biggest stumbling block for people are the longer paired passages. So again, some of the tips that I can tell you are to make sure that you're reading actively. And by reading actively, it means stopping periodically and summarizing to yourself, making sure you're actually engaging with the material, that you're expressing your understanding, and not just reading the words on the page. The other thing to think about is the acronym PSAA. And PSAA is a little abbreviation to keep in the back of your brain as you read these passages. What's the author's purpose? What's the structure? What is the argument, if you had to summarize this person's thesis? And what is their attitude? What's their tone? What is it that they're trying to do in this piece with the way that they present information? Are they being critical or acerbic or sarcastic and cynical? All of those are kind of negative words. Are they being positive or optimistic? Explain to yourself, right, what is the author's attitude? If you can do all four of those things with purpose, structure, argument, and attitude, you shouldn't have any questions that you can't answer in the following questions after the passage. Some of the tips and tricks that can help you. One of the things that I like to do personally is to give nicknames or epithets to the passages to keep them straight. They're going to ask questions like, which of the following described in passage 1 would the author of passage 2 most likely agree with? And so I like to do things like passage 1 guy is pro alternative energy, and then passage 2 guy is oil, and that way I can, when I write or read the questions, I can somehow find a way to shorten them and make them more sensible. So what would alternative fuel man say to oil man based on these lines? So that sometimes can help you if you get bogged down in the question. Also, remember to think like the test. In English class, all the time you're asked to think outside the box. Here, they want to know specifically what's being said. So don't try to think too far outside the box. Also, make sure you read the question stems. Make sure you are on the lookout for words like except or all of these but this one, because those can mean critical errors on the test that lead to a lower score. So as you go through the paired passages, stop periodically and really engage with what you're reading. So I want to take a look at the passage that's on page 7 of your practice piece. So if you'll go ahead and turn to the passages, it tells you that these two passages are adapted from books written in 2003 and 2004, respectively. So again, as we go through, I want you to practice doing this. You won't have me reading the passages to you as you're taking the test, but this is the kind of thing that you should prepare yourself to do. So let's start with passage 1. It is easy to understand why the mind may appear to be a forbidding, unapproachable mystery. The mind, as an entity, seems to be different in kind from other things we know, namely from the objects around us and from the parts of our own bodies that we see and touch. Right? So let's pause. So this is saying that for some people, the mind appears to be different than other bodily organs, ones that we can see and understand exactly what it does, right? One view says that the body and its parts are physical matter, while the mind is not. On one side is the physically extensive matter that constitutes the cells, tissues, and organs of our bodies. On the other side is the stuff we cannot touch, all the rapidly formed feelings, sights, and sounds that make up the thoughts in our minds. So here you really have to pause and do some mental gymnastics. So there are some people that say the mind is just an organ. It's made up of cells, tissues, that's all it is. However, there's another side that says it's more than just that. It's more than just the things that we can see and feel and touch or examine with a microscope. It's also the other kinds of things like thoughts that are more incorporeal, right? Things that are not physical in nature. It says, though, that this view is no longer mainstream in science or philosophy, although it is probably the view that most human beings today would regard as their own. So most people think that the mind is not just a collection of cells or tissues, rather that the mind is something special. It's more than that. But again, it says this view is no longer the scientific mainstream. That's important. This idea of the dualism of the mind and body was dignified by 17th century philosopher and scientist René Descartes. And again, as we get to this, we're giving the history of it. So we're going back to good old Descartes. Descartes proposed that the mind and the body interacted, yet he never explained how the interaction might take place beyond saying that the pineal gland was the conduit for such interactions. The pineal is a small structure located at the midline and base of the brain, and it turns out to be rather poorly connected and endowed for the monumentous job Descartes required of it. So Descartes says that the body and the mind work together, and when they asked how, he said, oh, it's the pineal gland. Well, today they've kind of debunked that idea, but that was his explanation for it. So again, we've got the historical development of the idea and what he believed, and then the idea that it's presently been debunked. Whether Descartes really believed in mind-body dualism is by no means certain. He might have believed it at some point and then not, which is not meant at all as a criticism. It would simply mean that Descartes was uncertain and ambivalent about a problem that has chronically plunged human beings into precisely the same state of uncertainty and ambivalence. Very human and very understandable. So again, he might have done a flip-flop, that he believed it and then he didn't. And again, as he says, that's not necessarily a criticism. That's what scientists do. In spite of its scientific shortcomings, the view identified with Descartes resonates well with the awe and the wonder we deservedly have for our own minds. And again, that kind of makes sense. We want to think of it as special. It's not just a collection of lumpy tissues, it's more than that, right? There is no doubt that the mind is special. Special in its immense capacity to feel pleasure and pain, and to be aware of the pleasure and pain of others, in its ability to love and pardon, in its prodigious memory, its ability to symbolize and narrate, in its gift of language with syntax, in its power to understand the universe and create new universes, in the speed and ease with which it processes and integrates disparate information so that problems can be solved. So again, all this is doing, if you were trying to think about the function or the structure, it's listing all of the cool things that the human brain can do. And this is why we think that it's special, that it has more of a kind of purpose or more of a conscience than something like the liver that just works, right? That it's somehow special. And here are all the special things that it can do. However, but awe and wonder at the human mind are compatible with the other views of the relationship between the body and the mind, and do not make Descartes' views any more correct. So just take a moment, and again, if you were taking notes on this sheet, don't write on my sheet, but again, if you were taking notes, what's the purpose of this particular article? What's the structure? What is the argument that it's making? And what is the attitude of the speaker? So just take a moment to think about that. Please go ahead and pause the recording for a moment as you do the PSAA on your own paper. Okay. If you properly did this, right, the purpose is to inform. It's arguing a particular position as well. And that position, as we get into it, in its argument, is that the mind is not special. It is an organ, and it functions. There is no division between the mind and the rest of the body. How is it structured? Well, it goes back and gives a little bit of information on Descartes, whose philosophy it was that started this, and then explained that even Descartes himself had questions about his own philosophy. And it at the end ends with this idea that, again, this view that Descartes had that the mind is special does not hold up today. And again, throughout this particular piece, he's very informative. There is not any kind of cynicism or sarcasm, so the tone is pretty straightforward. All right? So now let's take a look at passage 2. It is popular in some quarters to claim that the human brain is largely unstructured at birth. It is tempting to believe that our minds float free of our genomes. But such beliefs are completely at odds with everything that scientists have learned in molecular biology over the past decade. From cell division to cell differentiation, every process that is used in the development of the body is also used in the development of the brain. So yet again, here we have another guy saying that the brain and all the other bodily organs are structured exactly the same way, right? At the molecular level, the brain is no different than, say, the heart. Even though sometimes we imbue the mind with all of these special qualities, they're exactly the same kind of thing. The idea that the brain might be assembled in much the same way as the rest of the body, on the basis of the action of thousands of autonomous but interacting genes, is anathema to our deeply held feelings that our minds are special, yet somehow separate from the material world. So again, you might not necessarily know that the word anathema is something that's hated or loathsome or disgusting, right? But we can still get that, right? The idea that the brain acts the same way as the rest of the body is at odds with most of our feelings that our brain is a special kind of organ, right? Yet at the same time, for the Western intellectual tradition, it is a continuation, perhaps the culmination, of a growing up for the human species that for too long has overestimated its own centrality in the universe. So again, it's kind of a wake-up call. We think that our brains are what make us special, but our brains are no different than our other bodily organs. Copernicus showed us that our planet is not at the center of the universe. Harvey showed that our heart is a mechanical pump. John Dalton and the other 19th century chemists show that our bodies are, like all other matter, made up of atoms. Watson and Crick showed us how genes emerge from chains of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So again, here we have a list, and it's not important that you memorize this list. These are all lists of just showing what scientists have proven, that these various kinds of organs are functioning in this particular way, and it's illustrating the kind of sameness of each one of these different kinds of scientist contributions. All of them are showing us that, again, we are not necessarily special. In 1990, the decade of the brain, cognitive neuroscientists showed that our minds are the product of our brains. Early returns from this century are just showing that the mechanisms that build our brains are just a special case of the mechanisms that build the rest of our bodies. So again, the composition of the brain isn't special. There's no extra added fairy dust in there. Your brain is the same thing as any of your other bodily organs. There's no extra kind of conscience or cognizance that your brain has. The initial structure of the mind, like the initial structure of the rest of the body, is a product of our genes. Although some might see the idea that our brains are just a bunch of molecules grown in all the usual ways as a bleak renunciation of all that is special about humanity, to me it is an exciting modern take on an old idea that there is a bond that unifies all living things. So some people might not like the ideas that our brains aren't special organs, that they're just like everything else. But again, to this author, it says it's exciting. It's proof of the Lion King idea, of the circle of life, and that all things are interconnected. We are all the same. Through advances in molecular biology and neuroscience, we can now understand better than ever how deeply we share our biological makeup, physical and mental, with all the creatures with which we share our planet. So human brain does the same thing as, let's say, a monkey brain does. So therefore, we are all the same. And again, that's exciting to this particular theorist. So again, before you answer the questions, take just a quick moment to consider the PSAA. What is the purpose? What is the structure? What is the argument? And what is the attitude? So go ahead and pause for just a second while you consider the PSAA. Again, if you took a look at the PSAA, one of the things that you would see is that the purpose is showing that the human brain is not special. It's an organ like any other, like organs shared by other creatures. The structure, right, is to explain how this claim is again contradictory to many people's, but then to show the development of various kinds of historical inventors and scientists who have proven that the mind is no different than any of these other inventions. And again, at the end, the attitude of the speaker is one of optimism. Right? They're not sad that the brain is not being shown as being special or different than the body in some way. And again, in terms of the argument, they're arguing pretty much the same thing as the author of paragraph 1, this idea that the mind is no different than the rest of the organs of the body. What I'd like for you guys to do is to answer questions 13 through 24. Look at those questions and see how you do. We're going to go over those questions and their answers at a later date, but again, see how you do with those questions now that we went through the passage carefully and practiced the PSAA method. When you're finished, just go ahead and pause, and then we're going to start on section 5 on page 25. Before we get into the writing section, I'm going to ask you guys to take a look at the handout that you were given that says SAT Grammar Rules and Vocabulary Packet, and then we're going to do some examples. One of the things that you're going to find about the grammar section of the writing test is that this is extremely repetitive. They ask the same kinds of grammar mistakes on every test. So as long as you know the main categories, you're going to improve your score because you're going to be able to see them more easily. The first type of question that they're going to ask you a lot is subject-verb agreement. Right? So on the sheet, it tells you that the most common grammar mistake that students are tested on is subject-verb agreement. And here is an example. The committee, made up of several women, are deciding on the school budget next week. Well, in looking at that sentence, the subject of the sentence is committee. So a committee is one thing, and that's singular. So the committee is deciding on the school budget. Here's another example. We enjoyed the brilliant sunshine of the beach so much on that day that when we left, there was only one couple and one lifeguard still there. So again, in this particular one, the couple and the lifeguard are 3 people, so there were only one couple and one lifeguard still there. Another example is here. The television viewers claim that the number of scenes depicting alcohol consumption have increased dramatically over the last decade. When you look at the sentence, right, television viewers claim that the number, right, has increased dramatically. Of scenes is a phrase describing the number. So the number has increased dramatically. When you're doing these particular types of questions, always find the subject of the sentence and check the verb and make sure that the subject and the verb match. Another type of question that they're going to ask is pronoun agreement. So another common one is looking at the pronoun to see if it agrees with what came before. So a smart tennis player such as Samantha is someone who knows how to move around the court, can hit winners at the net, and controls their emotions. Well, the last I checked, Samantha is one person, and she is a girl, so not their emotions, but controls her emotions. So again, that's an incorrect pronoun use. Here's another example. The union insisted on an increase in their members' starting pay and threatened to call a strike if the company refused to meet the demand. The union is your subject here, and it's one thing. So the union insisted on an increase in its members' starting pay. And again, those can be tricky if you're not looking for them. So train yourself to look for the subject and then to look for the pronoun and see if those different things match. They have to match in number. Another kind of thing that they're going to ask you about is verb tense and parallel structure. Sometimes parallelism is easy, so they'll ask you something like, I like to run, to paint, and mowing the lawn. And obviously if you have to run and to paint, the last one should be to mow the lawn. Those kinds of verb parallelisms or those kinds of examples of parallel structure with nouns are really easy to pick out. Sometimes though, it's that the verb tenses don't agree. So on your sheet, it says the third grammar concept is parallel structure. So in a survey of the school's 5th graders playing in gym class, painting in art class, participating in science labs, and lunchtime were all mentioned repeatedly as favorite activities in school. So if it's playing, painting, participating, lunchtime needs to be something like eating lunch or having lunchtime. There needs to be an ing verb that goes in front of that. They're also going to ask you questions like this one. The farmer should not have been so careless as to leave the door of the house unbolted when he had gone to bed. So he should not have been careless as to leave the door when he went to bed. You don't need the helping verb had in this particular case. So watch those verb tenses and watch parallelism of all kinds of items, not just verbs, but sometimes nouns as well. That's one of the really common ones that you're going to see on this particular test. The next one that they have on the sheet is the subject and object of a sentence. So they give you the example here. The teacher asked Harry and me if we could do this. So the teacher asked whom? Asked me. Me is an object in that case. There aren't very many of those on the SAT, but there are a few. So again, if you ever have one of those questions with the pronouns and you're not sure, look at what it's doing in the sentence. Is it the subject of the sentence, like I went to the store? You don't say me went to the store, I went to the store. Or she went to the store with is a preposition, it needs an object. She went to the store with me. So again, there's not very many of those, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in mind as you're going through your mental checklist. The next one that they ask a lot about are misplaced modifiers. A misplaced modifier is one that doesn't make sense as it is, right? Here is an example of one of the misplaced modifiers. They sometimes call them incorrect comparisons as well. But again, here's an example. Shipwrecked on a desert island, coconuts and other fruits form the basis of the sailor's diet. This phrase here, shipwrecked on a desert island, describes coconuts. So in this sentence, you've said that coconuts are shipwrecked on a desert island. Well, it's not the coconuts that are shipwrecked, but rather the sailor. So you're going to have to revise that sentence because as it is, shipwrecked on a desert island is modifying the coconuts and other fruits. So again, in this sentence, it's incorrect because it states that coconuts are shipwrecked on an island and it modifies the wrong thing. They're also going to ask you about incorrect comparisons as well. And those are really tricky if you're not looking for them. Incorrect comparisons are examples such as this one on the SAT grammar rules sheet. Sam felt extremely confident going into the final round of interviews because his list of credentials was far more impressive than his competitor. In that sentence, you're comparing the list of his credentials with his competitor. And that's not really what you're comparing. You're comparing the list of his credentials with his competitor's credentials. Here's another example of how difficult it can be, especially when you're reading fast. Tim's garden grew more vegetables than his neighbor's. Right? This is an incorrect comparison. Tim's garden grew more vegetables than his neighbor's garden grew. Right? In this one, you're saying Tim's garden grew more garden vegetables than his neighbor's. So imagine his neighbors sprouting tomatoes from themselves. That doesn't work. But again, the garden is being compared to the neighbor's garden. So as it's written, this is incorrect. The tone of a violin is more pleasant than a tuba. Again, you're comparing tones. The tone of a violin is more pleasant than a tuba's tone, right? This is comparing a tone and a musical instrument. Those are incorrect comparisons. So again, be aware that those are questions that they're going to ask. And if you're reading very quickly, sometimes they're easy to get wrong. Another question that they're going to ask is incorrect prepositions. There are certain words in English that can only use certain prepositions. And this is on one of the last page of your grammar rules packet. They have rules and words that go together. So you use preoccupation with or inconsistent with. Those are some of the ones that you just know because you are a native speaker of English. These questions pick out people who speak English as a second language. So they'll give you something like this. We were cognizant, which means aware. We were cognizant about the problem. Well, you are aware of something. And so again, that's the wrong preposition. The woman was wary at the issue. Again, you can be wary of something, right? Or wary about, but again, you can't be wary at anything. And again, sometimes those are tricky unless you realize that there are certain words that use certain prepositions. Sometimes as a native speaker, those will immediately jump out at you. But again, if you're not sure if there's a sentence, check those prepositions, those directional words, in, out, among, between, through, of. All of those different words are prepositions. And so check them to make sure that they go with the verb that comes before them. The other kinds of errors that they ask for a lot are redundancy. So don't be afraid to shorten your sentences. I know in middle school, the longest of the answer choices is always the answer. That is not true in terms of taking the SAT. Sometimes they'll have things that are redundant, and again, you have to eliminate the redundancy in order to make the sentence more intelligible. Another thing that they're going to ask you about is diction errors, right? Diction errors are many different types. Diction is your word choice. So one type of diction error is using the wrong word. So they might ask you for a word that sounds similar to another one, like they'll ask about affect with an A as a verb, and effect with an E as a noun. So they might ask those kinds of words, or they might look for the word implement, but they'll give you the word instrument instead, and they're just looking to see that you know the right word choice. They're also going to ask you about adding ly to your adverbs. So again, quickly instead of quick is another diction kind of error that they will ask. And they're also going to ask about things like comparing things. So when you compare two things, you might use more, right? So she was more equipped to do this. And then if you have a superlative, you might have an est, so the fastest. Or you might say she was faster, not more fast. And those are all different kinds of ones that I would clump under the category of different kinds of diction errors. So be careful, because sometimes with that redundancy and diction errors, it's going to make sentences that are unintelligible. So you might have a sentence like this: Sarah and Karen were enjoying the hike until she felt ill. Who felt ill? Was that Sarah or Karen that felt ill? And again, we can't tell, so you're going to have to change that sentence in order to make it more intelligible. So again, those are all things that I would lump into the category of diction errors. On the handout entitled SAT Practice Directions, one of the things that I've asked for you to do is to work on the writing section. but I want you to do it in a particular order so you get used to looking at the number of questions that they ask on each one of these different sections of grammar errors. So the first questions that I'd like for you to look at have to do with subject-verb agreement questions. And again, one of the things I've written as a note is that just because it's in a section of common question types, it doesn't mean that there are errors necessarily. Right? So subject-verb agreement questions, I want you to do them in this order: 1, 16, 22, and 30. Then there's some pronoun agreement questions: 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, and 31. So do those together as a section. Then there's a few with some misplaced modifiers for you to look at. So 4, 9, 10, 11, and 28. Word choice, again, do them in that order. Fragments and comma splices, some incorrect comparisons, some parallelism, and a preposition question. So I'd like for you to go through the sheet and see which ones you can now pick out and understand what they're asking you to identify as those common errors. I guarantee you'll do a lot better than you did when you first took the PSAT all the way back in October. When you're finished with these, and again, it shouldn't take you very long to go through them, just go ahead and wait for the rest of the students to finish. If you finish early, you can take out your Lord of the Flies piece and start working on your stickies. You can also look at the last section of the writing to see which kinds of questions are in the last section, or you can go back and look at the vocabulary section at the very beginning of this, since we did vocab in quarter 1. Okay, so let's take a look at the questions in order. Number 1 says the plans for the old building was located by Mrs. Morimoto. So the plans not was located, but were. So when you look at the questions, that's not an answer choice. So the only one that would be correct is D. Mrs. Morimoto located the plans for the old building when she searched through municipal records. Number 2, animals that live underground, like some salamanders, having been sheltered from surface storms and extremes of temperature. This is obviously a fragment, so we need a verb that's going to correct that. And your answer choice should have been C, as in cat. They are sheltered. Question number 3 talks about drawing on the lore and tradition. She writes extensive, and again, that's not correct. It should be she writes extensively, right? So again, the question that's going to fix that without creating a comma splice is choice B. Number 4, this is a modifier question. It says Congress passed a bill that was designed to protect the delicate ecosystem of the United States prairies before adjourning for the holiday recess. This suggests that the prairies had a nice holiday recess. That's not correct. It's not the prairies that had it, but rather Congress. So your best answer choice to fix this is going to be D. Before adjourning for the holiday recess, Congress passed a bill. And again, that's going to be a little bit more clear as to who adjourned for the holiday recess. Question number 5 needs you to make it a positive phrase. That's a descriptor. So Salvador Dali, a Spanish artist who pioneered the style known as surrealism and produces, that's incorrect. So you have to change it to D, who pioneered the style of surrealism and produced some of the best known paintings. So again, this is going to get rid of the comma splice that you have there. Number 6, you have another problem with a comma splice. See where you have the they began with the Beatles in the mid-1960s. So your only choice here should have been C, beginning with the songs of the Beatles. Question 7 is a parallelism question. So Octavio Paz was a Mexican poet, critic, and diplomat. Those have to be in that particular order. Since you've got commas in a series, they need to be parallel. Question number 8 is also a parallelism issue. Surprisingly, studies show that the longer the line is, the less likely it is. Those phrases need to be parallel. Question number 9, during the 1992 Summer Olympics, the first held since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a loss of their national identity was felt by many Soviet athletes. This is a modifier question. So who felt the loss? Right? There's no noun here. So your choice is E. Many Soviet athletes felt a loss of national identity. Question 10 is also a modifier question, but in this case it's done correctly. An outstanding warrior, revered spiritual leader, and wily politician, Sitting Bull was chosen. So all of those things describe Sitting Bull. This is actually correct. So A is your best choice. Question 11 is a modifier question. So it says, a modern approach to a timeless story, Michael Radford. So apparently Michael Radford is a modern approach to a timeless story. That's not correct. So again, this should have been C, directing Al Pacino in The Merchant of Venice. Michael Radford takes a modern approach to a timeless story. Question number 12 is a comma splice. You have two complete sentences separated by a comma, and that can't happen. So you have to be careful in this one not to create more comma splices as you fix the sentence. So you should have had D, having overcome many rebuffs before being admitted to Geneva College, Elizabeth Blackwell went on to set up a medical clinic devoted to women and children. So that should have been D there. Question number 13, this is a pronoun problem. Buyers is plural, but he or she is singular. So again, you have to fix this. When purchasing new cars, because buyers are going to purchase cars plural, buyers must consider whether they can afford insurance. Question number 14 is also a pronoun program. The pronoun here, robots, does not match his predecessors. So again, unlike their predecessors. Question 15, I didn't have you do. This one is odd phrasing, but it's correct. Fascinating if somewhat elusive subject. Question number 16 is a subject verb. There is some people, right? So there are some people. And again, they're talking about talent in the arts of painting and creative writing is hereditary. So again, you've got a whole bunch of problems with talents and are hereditary. So the way to fix this one would best be choice E. Some people believe that talent in the art of painting or creative writing is. When you create the or, it's one or the other, so that one is singular and therefore correct. Number 17 is a tricky one. Each is singular. So each decided, not they, but each decided to become a volunteer firefighter. One and one and one. Each is singular. So again, each did not become, right, volunteer firefighters. They chose to become a. So one person, and one person. So each is singular. Question 18 is also a pronoun. The Cape buffalo is singular, but it says they eat tall, coarse grass. So again, it would be more correct. So B would have been your answer for this one. Question 19, the subject of this sentence is the feline habit, not felines themselves. And so it's a little confusing because you're talking about a habit keeps its claws. It's not the habit, it's the feline keeping its own claws sharp. So the best choice for this one is going to be E. The habit of scratching helps the feline, and then it explains what the actual subject of the sentence is. And I didn't have you do question 20, but A is correct. It's odd phrasing, but it's actually right. Were they to be told? Number 21, right? There was much speculation concerning about how, and again, that's concerning how. You don't need the preposition about there, so that's a preposition question. 22, this one is subject verb. Understanding the difference between criticism and insult enhances one's ability to engage in constructive argument. So understanding the difference, right? Understanding is your subject, enhances. That one is correct. Number 23, Gwendolyn Brooks won a Pulitzer Prize for a series of sonnet ballads. And again, there's a word missing, either which draws upon or that drew upon, but in any case, it's a fragment, and so B is your best choice for what is incorrect. This one is a word choice, number 24. Basing it on a note found, right? It should be based on, not basing it on. And that would be choice A. Number 25, The younger, right, Michelle Kwan began skating and then soon proved to be a better skater than either of her siblings. It's not the younger of 3 children, but the youngest. So A would be your choice. Number 26, although best known for her voiceover work in Japanese cartoons, the actress also starred in the Bleak film, and that one is correct. Though we can only admire the tennis star for his exceptional play, we not be oblivious from his rude behavior. You're not oblivious from, you're oblivious to, so D would be your best choice there. Departing from the largely ceremonial role traditionally assigned to the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt used her position to promote social reform, and that one is no error. Number 29, this one is a word choice. Once a model of corporate efficiency, the company had by the late 1990s become so large and bureaucratic, and then it has this weird to where, and that is not correct in any kind of grammatical or syntactical way in English. So C should be your best choice. Question 30 is also a subject-verb agreement one. So James Austin may have played a larger role in the development of his sister's skills than has been acknowledged. So that should be D. 31 is a pronoun problem. Though it has long been established that colds are caused only by viruses, many people persist in the erroneous belief that viruses are plural, they can be contracted. So D is incorrect. All right. 32 is a comparison, and this is one of those that can be tricky. Deadliest among all spiders is the black widow, whose venom is 14 times more toxic than a rattlesnake. A rattlesnake is not toxic. Its venom, however, is. So it should be D. It's more toxic than a rattlesnake's venom. So D is incorrect. Our instructor repeatedly ensured us that our harnesses, cable, and other climbing equipment had been checked and would not fail. This is a word choice. It's not insured, but assured, A-S-S-U-R-E-D. So again, this one is a kind of homophone. It sounds alike, and if you're writing very quickly and making quick choices, you can miss that, but it's a word choice problem. And 34, this one again is a parallel verb one. Egypt's chief archaeologist has reported the discovery of a pyramid thought to have been built some 4,300 years ago. So C would be incorrect here. So that's a just quick introduction to some of the big problems in the writing section that you're going to see on the SAT. Just being aware and starting to look at, is there a pronoun problem? Is there a subject-verb problem? Is there a diction error? Is there a problem with parallelism? Is there a problem with comparisons or superlatives? Which one is there a problem with in this sentence? If you ask yourself those kinds of questions, you're never going to have a problem with this section of the SAT or PSAT.